also specifically, I want to sort of touch upon the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that, because inherently Pakistani value system and upbringing is centered around thinking of future generations. So, you know, you get guidance not just from your parents, but you get guidance from your grandparents and your extended family, and everyone has a say on the individual's upbringing. So given that that's a reflection of Pakistani values and culture, it's important to sort of look at that in context in terms of, you know, what are we doing to activate? And we shouldn't just be creating opportunities for the next generations. We should be activating them as well, because creating opportunities is one thing, but what can we do now collectively to activate that? So that's kind of where the theme of the session is going. And how can we then use that to, or leverage that better to change people's lives, enhance people's lives, reduce inequalities, create decent economic work and growth, and how can we address some of the other issues that the world is facing that we see in countries like Pakistan, and that aligns us to the SDGs. So that's kind of where we're going with this session. Whilst we're waiting, Jehan, do you want to give a little bit of background to what you've been doing at the Nest? And that will give some context, and you can take the opportunity to plug the company, the organization as well, but just a little bit.
No, I'm always happy to talk about the Nest. So if you look at the background, I'm in my office right now, and this is the background. So that depicts the energy, the color, the vibrance of the entire place.
And I just wanted, sorry, I'm just interjecting there. And you have an unusual title as well. So you're not just the CEO, co-founder, you have something, and I want you to say it because I would feel a little bit strange saying it.
So since this is the Nest, I am the big bird.
Wow, big bird. Excellent.
And a lot of chief executives in Pakistan look at that as something that is not very professional.
A bit quirky.
But when you're dealing with startups, and it's always a good conversation piece when you start out. I even have the big bird written on my card.
Excellent.
So when you're introduced to someone, it's a good way to start a conversation. And in the startup ecosystem, we don't take ourselves seriously. It's the startups that we take seriously. So, you know, it was a good way. And it was something that was chosen by the startup ecosystem, the founders. They thought it was a good idea. And so I ran with it. Okay.
So the Nest is an organization. Is it government? Is it private?
No, it's totally private. We are part of the Pakistan Software Association.
Okay.
PASHA, which is the trade association representing the technology sector in Pakistan. So we started about 5.5 years ago. We started the Nest.io because we felt that for the IT sector to grow, we needed many more people to be starting companies in the tech sector, growing them and becoming part of the ecosystem. So that's why we started the Nest.io. We were supported by a number of private organizations who funded us because we charge nothing from the youngsters who join, because some of them with the best ideas wouldn't be able to afford it anyway. So it's exciting because, you know, Zubair, what I see is when we're talking about the SDGs, oh, there's Fahad. Hi, Fahad.
Hey, great to have you, Fahad.
Finally.
So what I was saying is we've been talking about SDGs and how do we get people and countries to adopt them. But I've never seen that as a problem for the startup ecosystem, simply because most of the founders look around them and see the problems that this country faces, and they try and come up with technologies and companies to address those problems. And it's amazing. I was looking through some of the companies that we have incubated here at the Nest, and many of them are addressing the SDGs, one or the other, or sometimes two or three of them. Yeah.
If you're aligning yourself to the SDGs as a company, but then you see that you have to react to your consumers who are now more demanding because they're ethically aware or conscious, then that provides a great springboard and perhaps a catalyst. Jehan, what's your take, given that you kind of occupy a slightly different space? So you've got individuals who come into your ecosystem because they perhaps might are frustrated with the products and services that are provided in society. Perhaps that's one grouping, or perhaps that they feel that they have a problem that they want addressed, that they have a solution to you. So how do you feel they can be more aligned to the SDGs, given that they're already working in the impact space? What's your kind of take on this? How do we activate them?
So they're already activated, but what we've seen now, which is a good sign, is that corporations who were not really paying too much attention to startups that were in the social space addressing SDGs are now actually talking to them, engaging with them, and trying to see how they can collaborate, because these youngsters pivot very quickly as the need arises. And we've seen that especially during the COVID crisis. You need masks? Okay, let's try and see if we can arrange for masks, arrange for ventilators, come up with an app that shows you which hospitals have beds available, anything and everything that they can do to make things accessible to people who need it. And I think organizations have seen that. Responsible organizations have started engaging with them to say, okay, what can we do that we as a large organization cannot address right away? But by collaborating with you, we can address these problems and then maybe take it further. So I think that's the role that startups are playing now, together with large organizations and mid-sized organizations who see the need and see a role for them. And this we've seen even in the area of fintech, where financial inclusion is a big deal right now. And maybe banks cannot address it for a country like Pakistan. So fintech players started by youngsters are now engaging either with banks to provide the solution or with other organizations to make sure that those payment solutions are available. So, it's a good sign. It's a good sign that people are collaborating. It's a good sign it's not us versus them. And so a lot of the SDG issues are being addressed collectively.
And do you both think, and I'm going to jump back over to Fasihul in a second, do you both think that, again, this, Jehan, you were talking about that youngsters, in your incubation hub,
let me define youngsters. Youngsters can be between the ages of, we've had one as young as 14.
And then up to 95, yeah?
And then late 30s.
Okay.
So we've had people within this age.
So from that grouping and the generation above, and Fahad, you talked about your consumers and they're far and wide, and everyone's kind of conscious, and I use that word deliberately. Do you think that's a reflection of Pakistani values? Are we inherently all about doing the right thing, being ethical, mindful? Are we looking at things like sustainability without even realizing it? And is this a reinforcement also of a Pakistan value system? So I'm basically asking, do you think that innately in the DNA of Pakistani as an individual, then reflective in then him or her position as an entrepreneur, a CEO or a citizen, SDGs are already in their mind, they're built in. Do you think that's true to have that? You're both nodding your head.
I think so. You see a lot of the hospitals that have been put up by the private sector. If you look at the NGOs that have been around, these are all, they didn't have to come up, but people felt the need for them and went and either raised money or used their own money to set them up and are running them very, very efficiently. So I think people see problems in Pakistan, and although they don't see it as philanthropy maybe sometimes, but they see that they need to solve that problem for somebody. And whether it's young people, whether it's businesses, whether it's older people, they're all trying to address these. And so when you look at sustainability, we had 3 graduates who were from NED University, which is in Karachi, who studied civil engineering. And they were going after very good jobs. And then they looked at the refugee crisis, the flood situation, the earthquake, and they decided to create sustainable housing that could be assembled in 3 hours, because they felt that the need for housing and sustainable housing was a big deal. And so modulus tech, which was recognized by the UN, UNIDO, the Clean Living Initiative, all of that, they went and did that. Although initially that was not something that would pay off very quickly. It was to help the ecosystem. It was to help people who needed housing, and housing that could be transported very easily.
And Jehan, you alluded earlier that even many of your startups are looking at impact or solving the world's problems through their services and products, and that aligns to the SDGs. And Fahad, you as an organization and as an individual on your journey and what you're doing, do you think that it's important to have an adoption of new mindsets? And do you think that it's time we built new business models? Jehan, I want to start with you first. What do you think? What's your take of the whole situation at the moment?
So I think as far as the startup ecosystem is concerned, as I was telling you earlier, they're already looking at and are involved in creating impact. And that seems to be the first thing they think of before they look at how much money they're going to make. They think money will come as long as they're trying to solve a problem that somebody in this country faces, especially a large number of people. So you look at healthcare using technology, look at remote education, you look at people with disabilities. So we have several startups that are looking at this area. I didn't even know when I asked one of them how many people suffer from disabilities in Pakistan. I was told it's over 10 million. And so we have a startup, Wonder Tree. They're using augmented reality to help with the education and the cognitive development of young people. And that impact, they've already impacted in the short time they've been around. They've impacted about 4,000 people, 4,000 young people who would otherwise not be included. Similarly, there is another startup by the name of Connect Here that is just dealing with people with hearing disabilities. And that's a couple of million people in this country who have hearing disabilities. And they're trying to bring them into the mainstream. So it's not just, oh, these guys have a problem, let's solve it. It's also, how can we make it more inclusive? So they held a concert for 300 young people who are deaf. And you and I would never think of this because, these people can't hear. Why are you holding a concert? But what they did was they used lights, vibration, they used sign language on stage and held it at one of the local universities, Habib University, and watch those young people who experienced music for the first time. It was really, so amazing. So I think we don't have to worry about changing the mindsets of the young people in this country. And we're lucky that we have so many young people in this country. They're looking around, they're solving problems, they're addressing them, they're making sure it includes everybody and is not restricted to just a few. Yes, I was listening to the earlier session and I agree that not everybody has a smartphone, but hey, 78 million people in this country have access, right? That is, let's begin with them and then keep addressing the problem.
Anyone in Pakistan and Pakistanis overseas about aligning themselves for more meaningful impact, both during COVID and then after COVID, whether they are an entrepreneur, an individual, part of a company, government, academia, student, whatever. What top tip or what advice could you give them in sort of aligning themselves to the SDG, or what's the value addition?
So I would add to that. I think of those who need your support. Think of those that cannot fend for themselves. Think of those who really could use your help right now, whether it's in terms of financial assistance, whether it's in terms of mental health, dealing with mental health, whether it's in terms of just some support or an ear, just provide it. Because right now we are all facing different kinds of issues. Some of us are more fortunate than others. And I think those that need to make sure that we look around and see who needs help.